The night was cold and wild on the coast of Zalyra. Waves crashed hard against the rocks, and the fog was so thick that Kwame could barely see his own hands. He had fished these waters all his life, but luck had left him long ago. This was his last night at sea before he gave up for good. With a tired heart, he cast his net into the angry water one final time. But instead of fish, something strange tugged back. As he pulled with all his strength, he heard a faint cry, a sound too soft, too human, to belong to the sea. When the net rose above the water, his breath caught. Inside was a mermaid, her silver scales torn and bleeding, her face pale with pain. She looked at him with wide, shining eyes full of fear. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Help me, or my child will die." For a moment, Kwame froze, unsure if he was dreaming or cursed. Every story he had ever heard warned never to touch the creatures of the deep. But the way she looked at him, so helpless and real, broke through his fear. Without thinking, he lifted her from the net, cradling her carefully as he stumbled toward the shore. The wind screamed and the waves rose higher, as if the ocean itself was watching. Kwame didn't know it yet, but by saving her life, he had broken a law older than time itself. Kwame carried the wounded mermaid through the fog until he reached his small hut by the cliffs. The night was still wild, the waves crashing like drums below. He laid her gently on the floor, covering her shimmering tail with old blankets so no one would see what she truly was. Her skin was cold and pale, her breathing weak. Unsure what else to do, he mixed salt in warm water and fed it to her, remembering how sea creatures needed the taste of the ocean to live. He crushed herbs he used for wounds and pressed them over her torn scales, hoping it would ease her pain. For days, he kept her hidden, sneaking food and water to her while pretending everything was normal. But word spread quickly in the village. People noticed how he no longer went out to fish. They saw him walking home late, carrying buckets of water and seaweed. Soon the whispers began. Some said he had found treasure from a wrecked ship, others claimed he was hiding a sea demon. The old women warned that helping sea creatures brought curses. Kwame tried not to listen, but fear grew in his heart each time he stepped outside. Still, every evening he returned to the hut, and the mermaid would speak to him in a soft, musical voice. She told him her name was Soraya and spoke of her home beneath the waves, a glowing kingdom called Orinthia, where coral palaces shone like jewels and the kings commanded the tides with their voices. Kwame listened like a child hearing stories for the first time. Her words made him dream again. She told him of whales that sang to the stars and rivers of light that flowed under the sea. In return, he told her about life on land, the hunger, the storms, the way people feared what they didn't understand. Slowly, they began to trust each other. Soraya's fear of the surface faded, and Kwame's sadness started to lift. Sometimes she laughed softly, and for a moment, the little hut felt warm again. But as her belly grew heavier and her time neared, strange things began to happen. Dead fish washed up on the beach in hundreds, their silver bodies shining under the sun. The wind carried a low hum that sounded almost like a voice calling Kwame's name. The villagers grew restless, saying the sea was angry. One night, the moon turned a deep red, hanging over the water like a bleeding eye. Even Kwame felt the fear settle in his chest. He looked at Soraya, who now lay weak and trembling. Her eyes shimmered with both beauty and sorrow. "They are coming," she whispered. "The sea can feel me." Kwame didn't know who she meant, but he could sense it too. The ocean seemed alive, watching, waiting. Outside, the waves began to rise higher, and the wind carried the faint sound of something ancient moving in the deep. The night the mermaid gave birth, the world felt different. The air was heavy, and the ocean roared like a beast that could not be calmed. A red moon hung above the sea, painting everything in the color of blood. Kwame could feel it in his bones that something powerful was about to happen. Inside his small hut, Soraya lay weak and trembling, her tail glimmering faintly under the dim light of the fire. Sweat and seawater mixed on her skin as her body shivered with pain. Her cries rose and fell with the sound of the waves, echoing through the cliffs like thunder from another world. Kwame did everything he could. He brought her water, held her hand, whispered words of comfort he didn't even believe himself. He had never helped bring a child into the world, much less one born of the sea. But something inside him, some old instinct, guided his hands. The storm outside grew louder, the roof shaking as rain began to fall in thick sheets. Then, with a final cry that tore through the night, Soraya gave birth. In her arms lay a small, glowing child, her skin soft and silver, her tiny fins shining like starlight. She was beautiful, too beautiful to belong to the world above. For a moment, there was peace. The baby's cry filled the air, fragile and pure. But then the ground trembled, and the sea roared louder than ever. Kwame looked out through the broken window and froze. A massive wave had risen far on the horizon, taller than any he had ever seen, swallowing the reflection of the moon. The ocean seemed alive, angry, calling. The wind howled through the cracks of the hut, carrying whispers in a language he couldn't understand. Soraya's eyes widened with fear. She held her baby close, then reached for Kwame's hand, gripping it tightly. "They found me," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Promise me, you'll protect her." Her silver eyes filled with tears that shimmered like pearls. "Please, Kwame." He nodded, though his heart pounded with confusion and dread. Before he could ask who she meant, the door burst open. A blast of cold sea spray rushed in, and in that instant, the hut seemed to lose its weight. Soraya's body began to glow, the light growing brighter until Kwame could barely see. He reached for her, shouting her name, but his hands closed on empty air. The water inside the hut swirled violently, and then, with a sharp flash, she was gone, pulled back into the sea by unseen hands. The waves outside crashed in rhythm, as if they had claimed what belonged to them. When silence finally fell, Kwame looked down and saw the child still in his arms. She blinked up at him with soft silver eyes that reflected both the sea and the moon. The storm had calmed, but the world no longer felt the same. The ocean had taken the mother, but left behind her daughter, glowing like a promise. 7 days passed after the night Soraya disappeared into the waves. The sea had been strangely quiet since then, too quiet. The gulls stopped flying near the cliffs, and even the wind seemed to move slower, heavy with something unseen. Kwame stayed inside his hut, caring for the baby the mermaid had left behind. She was unlike any child he had ever seen, her tiny scales shimmered faintly under the light, and when she laughed, it sounded like water flowing over smooth stones. Sometimes, her eyes glowed a soft silver when the tide came in. Kwame named her Nia, meaning purpose, because she had given his broken life a new meaning. But the peace did not last. On the 7th night, when the moon hung pale over the sea, a strange rumble rose from the deep. The air grew cold and sharp, and the waves began to move as if something massive was stirring beneath them. Kwame stepped outside, holding Nia close against his chest. The ocean looked alive, boiling and twisting as a dark shadow spread across the horizon. Suddenly, the water split open with a sound like thunder. From the depths rose a figure so large that even the cliffs seemed small beside him. It was the Sea King, Enthelos, ruler of Orinthia. His skin shimmered like dark stone, and his crown was made of bone and coral, glowing faintly under the moonlight. His eyes burned with an ancient, unshakable rage, the kind that belonged to something that had seen the world born and broken. Behind him, an army of mere warriors appeared, their spears gleaming like silver fire, their tails slicing through the waves in perfect formation. The sea roared around them, as if it bowed to his command. Kwame froze. His heart pounded so hard he could barely breathe. Nia whimpered in his arms, and her small fins flickered with light. The king's deep voice rolled across the cliffs, echoing through the wind. "You saved what was not yours to save," he said, each word heavy as stone. "You owe us a life." The ground shook beneath Kwame's feet. Waves slammed against the rocks, tearing pieces of his hut apart. He stumbled backward, clutching the child tightly. He wanted to run, but where could he go? The sea was everywhere. The king's eyes locked on him, cold, ancient, and full of fury. "I saved her," Kwame shouted over the roar. "She was dying. I couldn't let her or her child be lost." His voice trembled, but his grip never loosened. The king's gaze darkened. "Mercy is not yours to give," he thundered. "The laws of the deep are older than your kind." The waves rose higher, spraying salt into the air. Kwame stood shaking, torn between fear and defiance. For a moment, the two worlds stared at each other, the man from the land and the ruler of the sea. And though Kwame's heart was breaking, he did not bow. He held the child tighter, whispering softly, "You'll have to take me first." The wind howled over the cliffs as the Sea King's shadow covered the shore. His eyes burned like fire beneath the water's surface, and his army of mer warriors surrounded the waves, their spears glowing faintly in the dark. Kwame stood in front of his broken hut, holding the mermaid's child close to his chest. He could feel her trembling, her small hands clutching his shirt, her eyes wide with fear. The Sea King's deep voice rolled through the air like thunder. "Return the child to the sea," he said, "or give us a life in her place. Balance must be kept." Kwame's heart twisted in his chest. He knew what the king wanted, either he gave up the child or someone would die. But when he looked down at the tiny girl in his arms, he couldn't bring himself to let her go. "No," he said, his voice shaking but steady. "She's innocent. She deserves to live, not to pay for your anger." His words echoed through the wind. "You talk about balance, but what kind of king takes life from a child?" For a long moment, the sea was silent. Then Enthelos's face hardened. "You speak of things you do not understand," he thundered. "You broke the laws of the deep, and now the sea demands its due. If you will not return her, then the sea shall take what you love most." The air turned cold. The ocean began to rise, slow at first, then faster, roaring as it climbed the cliffs. Waves crashed over the beach, swallowing boats and huts in their path. The villagers screamed and ran, trying to save their homes. Fields disappeared beneath the tide, and the water glowed faintly red under the moonlight. The people looked toward Kwame's hut, where the sea seemed to rage the hardest. "It's him," one man shouted. "He's cursed us." Another screamed, "He brought a sea demon among us." Panic spread like fire. The villagers stormed toward Kwame's hut, faces twisted with fear and fury. They didn't see the small child in his arms or the tears in his eyes, they only saw the storm and the man they blamed for it. Kwame tried to explain, shouting over the roar of the wind, "She's just a baby. She's not the curse." But no one listened. They dragged him from his home, their hands rough and angry. Someone tied his wrists with rope. Someone else tore the child from his arms, setting her on the ground. The waves were rising fast now, crashing against their feet. "The sea wants him," an old woman cried. "Give him back before it takes us all." And before Kwame could speak again, they threw him toward the water. He fell hard, the cold hitting him like 1,000 knives. Above him, lightning split the sky. As the waves pulled him under, the last thing he saw was the little girl's silver eyes watching from the shore, glowing softly in the dark. The sea swallowed Kwame whole, its cold grip dragging him down into the dark. He fought to breathe, but the water pressed hard against his chest, pulling him deeper and deeper. He thought this was how it would end, alone, forgotten, taken by the sea he had once trusted. But just as his strength began to fade, a strange light broke through the darkness. It grew brighter, warmer, until the ocean around him shimmered like silver fire. Then he saw her, the mermaid child. She was no longer a helpless baby. In only days, she had grown into a young girl, her hair flowing like liquid silver, her eyes glowing like lightning under the waves. The water seemed to move around her as if obeying her will. She reached out her hand, and suddenly, the pull of the ocean released him. Kwame gasped as he rose back toward the surface, carried by a soft current that lifted him like a cradle. When he broke through the water, the storm had gone silent. The villagers stood frozen on the shore, their torches flickering in the wind. The girl stood on the waves as if they were solid ground, her feet glowing faintly. Her voice rang out clear and strong, though it sounded both human and not. "He saved my mother," she said, pointing toward Kwame. "He owes nothing." Her words echoed through the cliffs, rolling like thunder that brought no fear. The villagers stared, unable to speak. Even the Sea King paused, his giant form rising slowly from the water, his coral crown catching the moonlight. His eyes, once burning with anger, now filled with something else. Recognition. The girl looked just like Soraya, the queen he had lost. Her silver eyes, her calm strength, it was as if the sea itself had given her back to him in another form. The waves around him began to ease, their fury fading into gentle ripples. The girl lifted her hand again and spoke in a language no human could understand, a soft, flowing tongue that seemed to belong to the ocean itself. The water responded instantly, glowing with light as the winds died down. For the first time, King Enthelos lowered his head. The great sea warriors behind him sank into the depths, their weapons dimming. The villagers fell to their knees, their anger replaced by awe and fear. Kwame stood weak and shivering on the sand, unable to believe what he was seeing. The same child they had called a curse had just commanded the sea to be still. The girl turned toward him, her glowing eyes soft now. "You are safe," she said quietly. "Mother watches from the deep." And as she spoke, the last of the storm clouds broke apart, letting moonlight spill across the calm water. For the first time in many nights, the sea was at peace, and so was Kwame. The sea was calm and quiet after the storm, but Kwame could feel something calling to him from beneath the waves. The mermaid child stood before him, her silver eyes glowing faintly under the moonlight. "Come with me," she said softly, her voice both gentle and commanding. Before he could speak, the water rose around them, warm and weightless, pulling him under, but this time, it did not feel like drowning. The sea seemed to welcome him. He could breathe, he could see, and light shimmered everywhere. They sank deeper and deeper until a new world unfolded before his eyes. Below the surface lay Orinthia, the hidden kingdom of the sea. It was more beautiful than anything Kwame had ever imagined. Towers of coral glowed in colors that shifted like rainbows. Whales sang in the distance, their voices deep and full of sorrow. Schools of silver fish darted between crystal arches, and the ground sparkled like stars scattered beneath the waves. The mermaid child led him through it all, her fins leaving trails of light behind her. Every creature they passed stopped to bow their heads in respect. At the heart of the city stood a great palace carved from coral and pearl. Its gates opened with a hum, and inside, the Sea King waited. His anger was gone now, replaced by a deep sadness that weighed heavier than the ocean itself. He looked at Kwame with tired eyes. "You wish to know why I raged," he said. His voice was quieter now, no longer thunder but sorrow. "My queen, your mermaid, was hunted by men. She fled to your shores to save our child, but the sea was cruel, and she died bringing her into this world. I thought you were the cause. I was wrong." Kwame's heart ached. He finally understood. The Sea King had not been a monster, he had been a grieving husband, blinded by loss. The mermaid child floated between them, her presence calm and glowing. She looked at her father with love and at Kwame with gratitude. "Mother would not want hate," she said softly. "She would want peace." Her words carried through the water like a song. For a moment, even the sea seemed to hold its breath. The king lowered his head. "You have shown courage and kindness where others showed cruelty. For that, I offer you a choice," he said. "Return to the surface and live as a man, or stay here and guard the bridge between our worlds." Kwame looked up through the water, where the faint light of the moon shimmered above. He thought of his lonely hut, the villagers' fear, and the life he had left behind. Then he looked at the child, who smiled with her mother's eyes. "I will stay," he said. "Let me protect what she loved." The Sea King nodded. The waters around him glowed softly, wrapping Kwame in warmth. For the first time in his life, he felt at peace, no longer a man lost at sea, but a guardian where two worlds touched. Years passed, and the story of Kwame and the sea became legend. The villagers of Zalaira rebuilt their homes, but they never forgot the night the ocean rose against them, or the man who vanished beneath it. On quiet evenings, when the wind was soft and the tide gentle, some swore they saw a faint light moving along the water's edge. It looked like a man's figure, glowing just enough to shimmer against the dark sea. He walked where no human could, on the line between sand and surf, his eyes fixed on the horizon as if guarding something precious. Fishermen spoke of strange calm whenever that light appeared. Storms that once tore their boats apart would suddenly fade into stillness. Nets that returned empty for days would come back full when the glow touched the waves. They began to call him the Bridge Guardian, a spirit who watched over both land and sea. Children grew up hearing the story, told in whispers by their grandmothers, of a fisherman who loved too deeply, who defied the ocean and found his peace beneath it. Then one night, many years later, the sea turned crimson again under a red moon. The sailors out on the water froze in fear. But as the waves rose, they saw him, Kwame, standing tall where the surf met the shore. Beside him was a silver-haired girl with fins that glimmered like stars. Together they looked out over the ocean, calm and unafraid. The storm never came. The waters went quiet. And when the sailors returned, trembling with awe, the elders only nodded and said, "He's the man who saved a mermaid, and paid the sea's price for love."